Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome everybody again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really awesome guest today involved in creating a better tomorrow. Today we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Erwin Gianchandani, who is the United States National Science Foundation's Assistant Director for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships, leading their newly established TIP Directorate, which is focused on harnessing our nation's really vast and diverse talent pool to ultimately advance critical and emerging technologies and addressing pressing societal and economic challenges, and ultimately accelerating the translation of this research, as they say, from lab to market and ultimately society. Prior to becoming the assistant director, he served as the senior advisor for the organization, where he helped develop the plans for the new directorate in collaboration with other colleagues at NSF, government agencies, industry, and academia. During the previous 6 years, Dr. Gianchandani was NSF Deputy Assistant Director for Computer and Information Science and Engineering, twice serving as acting assistant director, and his leadership and management of that organization included the formulation and implementation of their directorate's billion-dollar annual budget, strategic and human capital planning, and oversight of the day-to-day operations of their team of over 130. During that time, he led the development and launch of several new NSF initiatives, including Smart and Connected Communities Program, Civic Innovation Challenge, Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, and the National Artificial Intelligence Research Institute. Before joining NSF, he was the inaugural director of Computer Community Consortium, providing leadership to the computing research community and identifying and pursuing bold, high-impact research directions. Dr. Gianchandani holds a PhD in biomedical engineering from the University of Virginia. In 2021, he received the Distinguished Presidential Rank Award awarded to members of the federal government, Senior Executive Service for Sustained Extraordinary Accomplishment. We're honored to have him with us today. Dr. Erwin Gianchandani, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Ira. It's great to be with you. I think my number one lesson learned this morning is I should shorten that bio, but it's great to be with you today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great having you. I'd love to start off at the beginning, if we could here, because, as I mentioned in the bio, you did your PhD in biomedical engineering. I was taking a look at your PhD, looking at really interesting work in transcriptional regulatory systems. You did a lot of work in biochemical networks and regulatory networks. And then there was this really interesting article written about you at UVA, and you were talking about how systems biology sort of was the perfect sort of thing to lay the groundwork for what you're doing now, because at the end of the day, it's all about convergence and having to have these important conversations with disparate groups of folks. Systems biology, you need to bring together, molecular biology and artificial intelligence, or all sorts of other disciplines. Take us back to the beginning on this one, if you would, because I think it lays the groundwork for why you're doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Well, yeah. So you've done your homework, Ira. So that's absolutely true. So when I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia, I was very focused on systems biology. I was actually a grad student in a research lab that had just been established at the University of Virginia. So I was my advisor's first PhD student, as it turns out. And we were looking at being sort of the lab that would be the home to systems biology oriented work for the entire university. So we had faculty from, as you said, molecular biology and chemistry and other parts of biomedical engineering and computer science coming to us. And we would go to them too, of course. It was a collaborative effort to really understand what were some of the challenge points, problems, opportunity spaces when it came to better understanding molecular systems, as the case was for me back then, and trying to take a systems-based approach, trying to be able to bring computation and data and experimentation all together, and trying to be able to do this in a way that's very iterative. So, in systems biology, you have sort of the wet lab environment, you have the dry lab environment, and computation and modeling and predictive modeling. And what we were hoping to do is to try to merge those two together in a much more integrated way, where maybe you generate some hypotheses based off of your computational model that serves to drive some experiments that you might run in a lab. You run those experiments, you get more data that serves as fodder for the next model or input into the model that you had built to hone that model. And it's sort of a virtuous cycle that you're repeating on itself to better characterize the system that you're exploring. And so in many ways, as you saw in that article that you referenced, what we do today and what I've done sort of throughout my career here at NSF has been to try to try to seize upon those values around understanding the system, understanding the various constituents who should be a part of the system and the conversation, recognizing that oftentimes when you bring folks together from different backgrounds, different perspectives, they're going to speak somewhat different languages. And so you have to understand the language, whether it be terminology in biology versus terminology in computing or what the case may be, but understand those different languages and really be able to view the challenge and the opportunity through the lens of the partner with whom you're working or you're collaborating. And so I think those values, and to a large extent, have shaped some of the things that I've done here at NSF prior to the establishment of the TIP Directorate, but then certainly have honed in on really trying to emphasize what we're trying to do in the TIP Directorate proper. So in particular, you sort of started from the place of trying to advance technologies, trying to address societal challenges and economic challenges, trying to create opportunities for everyone everywhere. This is something that my boss, the director of the agency, Sethuraman Panchanathan, since he came to the foundation 3 years ago, he has stressed, which is we need to do a better job of creating opportunities for everyone across the country, really harnessing the demography of innovation, the geography of innovation that exists in every corner of the country, and at the same time ensuring that, there can be innovation anywhere. And there are challenges everywhere. There are opportunities for innovating on those challenges and resolving those challenges. But to be able to do all of this work effectively, it requires us really going out broadly and deeply and engaging folks from different backgrounds, different sectors, different perspectives, bringing all of those constituents to the table to help shape the research agenda that we're going to pursue or the workforce development agenda that we're going to pursue. So yeah, in many ways, some of what I did back in grad school all those years ago, I always say to today's graduate students, whenever I try to mentor someone or give back, I always say it's not so critical what university you go to or what department you go to, it's your mentor. And then the second thing I say is it's about trying to understand, yes, you want to understand the science that you're learning and so on, but understand the tools that you're going to learn in that experience of researching, writing a paper, doing a patent. Understand the tools that you learn through that process and put those tools in your toolbox because they'll come to bear sometime down the road in your next job or the job after that and so forth. And so I really find that that's what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, Erwin, if you could take us a little into the new directorate, because here you are, you're at NSF, which a major research funding institution for sort of all the non-NIH stuff. We profile a lot of folks that are NIH funded nowadays, but under your broad sort of portfolio is everything from math, computer science, economics, the social sciences. And then, reading a little bit about TIP per the website, there were a series of calls from our Congress say, look, we got a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline here, whether it's AI or quantum computing or other stuff that's going to impact society in a major way. Different acts, America Competes, the Chip and Science Act. take us a little, because obviously we hear about the stuff on the news, but ultimately how all that gets translated to, hey, here's this new directorate, and Erwin, you're going to be running this thing. Talk a little bit how all this came about.
Sure. Well, so first of all, I'd say it's less about me, more about the rest of the team here. And I think it starts with the director of the agency and starts really with the administration and Congress, as you described, for the vision and the agenda that we're trying to set as we move forward. So Ira, maybe I'll back up for a second, as you suggested, and just make sure that we remind all of our viewers today that the National Science Foundation has been around for more than 70 years. We're often not as well known, particularly as compared to, you mentioned NIH and other agencies, cabinet level departments and so forth within an administration, within the executive branch of government. But we've been around for more than 70 years. It all started with a manuscript that a guy named Vannevar Bush wrote in 1945 on the heels of World War II, really trying to make the case for why basic research could well position the country as a global leader when it comes to competitiveness and national security and economic security and so forth. And in fact, for 70 plus years now, 73 years, as a matter of fact, the National Science Foundation, from that original Organic Act that Congress passed and the president signed into law in 1950, has really focused on, let's support the frontiers of science and engineering, every area, every discipline of science and engineering, other than the medical sciences, as you pointed out, every discipline area of science and engineering largely supported by NSF. And that means providing researchers at academic institutions and students at academic institutions with access to funding and resources and infrastructure that allows them to be able to conduct the research that in many ways has changed our lives over the course of that 7-decade period, right? We have devices that we all walk around with today. We have access to information at our fingertips. Many of us do, although we need to do a better job of getting access to information and internet connectivity to every corner of the country. But we have access to MRI machines and barcodes that are used at grocery stores and so forth. All of those have their roots in basic research that NSF helped support over the course of that 70 plus year trajectory. At the same time, I think that what we saw with our Congress over the course of the last 2 or 3 years, and as you mentioned, it started with a piece of legislation, the Endless Frontier Act. The Endless Frontier Act became the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act. The U.S. Innovation and Competition Act became the CHIPS Act, and then the CHIPS and Science Act, which ultimately was the legislation that was passed and signed into law back in August of last year. But it all started from a place of, let's look at where we are today, and are we at a certain inflection point? And are we at that inflection point for a few reasons? So number one, competition in a number of technology areas, whether it be artificial intelligence or advanced wireless technologies or semiconductors and microelectronics, and the need to reshore fab capabilities here in the US, or biotechnologies. I come from a biotech background. Quantum information science, regardless of the technology area, it's clear that across that landscape, there is intense competition globally by many, many nations. And it's going to require sustained investment by the US to ensure that we continue to be in the vanguard of competitiveness, as Panch, the director here, likes to talk about. So that's number one. Second reason why this is somewhat of an inflection point is the set of socioeconomic challenges that we face as a nation, as a society, as a globe, whether it be challenges around the climate, whether it be challenges around critical infrastructure. We've seen, for example, when winter storms have gone through parts of our country, it knocks out the power grid and the ramifications associated with that. Whether it be issues of equity that I think became very apparent over the last few years in terms of equitable access to education or healthcare, or a variety of other sorts of key life ingredients, right? And how that manifests. And so when you look at the socioeconomic challenges, that's another aspect that I think is prompting attention and warranting attention today. And then the third, in many ways, is around this I think, long-standing challenge that we've had when it comes to the investments that we make out of NSF or out of the federal government, or even at the local level, is the realization that in science and technology and engineering and mathematics, we have still a long ways to go to be able to engage the full diversity, the full breadth of talent that exists in all the different corners of our country. And I think we've seen over the course of the last few years, Ira, just how important it is to have diverse perspectives, designing new technologies so that the designers have the same perspective as the users of those technologies. We've also seen how, societal challenges like the climate manifest differently in different parts of the country. And so having those different perspectives across the country is really important. And finally, we've seen that in many ways, America's diversity is our unique competitive advantage vis-a-vis other nations. And so I think it's for those three reasons: the challenge that we have in terms of global competition on a technology landscape, the socioeconomic challenges that we face, and the need to be able to harness the missing millions, the millions who are missing from science and technology and engineering and mathematics today. Those were some of the, I think, seminal ingredients that came together for the Congress and the administration and NSF to say, this is in many ways, a generational moment, a generational opportunity for us to be able to try to tackle some of these challenges and opportunities that we see on the horizon. And as a matter of fact, so the CHIPS and Science Act legislation officially codifies it. It authorizes NSF to establish a new directorate for technology, innovation, and partnerships, whose mission is to work collaboratively with all the other directorates at NSF, all the other science and engineering disciplines that we support, to work collaboratively with other agencies and private industry and nonprofits and foundations and so on, to ultimately accelerate technology development, to accelerate the translation of technology to impact, and to accelerate talent creation as well. How do we engage that broad and diverse talent and get folks excited and get folks engaged and get folks savvy about working in the STEM spaces, the traditional STEM spaces and beyond? So I think that's how this all, in some sense, came together. And at least the way that, the director and I and others here at NSF like to think about it and like to talk about it, this is sort of a paradigm expansion for us. I don't want to say paradigm change because, that sometimes suggests that, we're moving away from our mission, or we're changing what we're doing in terms of who we're trying to serve and so forth. NSF's budget this year is almost $10 billion. In fact, we saw the biggest increase from last year to this year that we've ever seen from one year to the next. And some of that is going towards supporting the TIP Directorate, but a lot of it is going towards supporting the rest of the foundation. So that's why I like to think of it as sort of a paradigm expansion more than a paradigm change. We have long supported individual faculty and students on university campuses. We have long supported their ideas, their discoveries, their innovations that we've then pushed to the market and to society. And we will continue to do that. But we also want to additionally emphasize through TIP investments that bring the users, the beneficiaries, the consumers of the research to the table from the start, have them help shape the research opportunities, work hand in glove, co-design, co-create, pilot, prototype with researchers and students as well. And so now the market has brought to the table these research problems. And so the market and society are now demanding solutions that we then pull out into the market and into society. So kind of an expansion from, and this is broad brushstrokes because I think our agency has done some of this market pull as well over time, but really trying to double down on, it's not just about technology push, but it's also about sort of this market demand piece that I think we're really excited about as well. So I don't know if that answers your question, but in some ways that's how we think about this evolution over the last few years, from Endless Frontier Act to CHIPS and Science, and how we see it really consonant with congressional priorities, administration priorities, NSF priorities, and what we're really all about at the end of the day.
Excellent. Yeah, that's spot on. And just to stress one of the points that you just made in there. This is sort of in the vision section on the website. You mentioned use-inspired research, and the translation. And I think that's something that, as you were just saying, we think, a lot of people think, okay, we do all this research, what comes out of it, and this is something that is just, you're saying right there per the director, you're doubling down on, hey, we've got to get not just the research done, but we've got to push this out to society in the form of new businesses and new products and services. A lot of programs, we probably don't have time to go into all of them, but I thought based on what you were just mentioning, we could touch on a few of them. And I think probably the best place to start would be on the principle of a convergence accelerator. Again, sort of taking what you were just mentioning, understanding we got to merge these innovative ideas together, the innovative approaches to solve some of these challenging issues. What goes on in a convergence accelerator?
Yeah, that's great, Ira. I'm glad you started with the Convergence Accelerator. In fact, so one of the things that we did when we stood up this new directorate is we felt that, we kind of looked around and took stock of what are some existing programs that really directly align with the vision for the TIP Directorate that we just spent a little bit of time talking about. And so there were a few programs that we felt were in that strong alignment and made sense to shift into the TIP Directorate and have TIP being their home. And sort of in many ways, when I talk to the program officers who've been managing these programs, when I talk to the leadership that's been overseeing these programs, I think they're excited by this shift into TIP because they see it as even more empowering, right? So even more trying to elevate some of the activities and perspectives that they are trying to imbue and pursue. So the Convergence Accelerator is one of those programs, and I'll talk about it in just one second. We also have a whole lab to market platform here at NSF. A little known fact about NSF is we were the first agency with the Small Business Innovation Research, or SBIR program, that has helped catalyze startups and small businesses. We were the first agency in the federal government to do a pilot around that and to launch a program back in the 1970s and 1980s. And now more than a dozen agencies across the federal government have their own versions of the SBIR STTR program that we all sort of work together on. So we're not as well known for that translational component. We're more known as a fundamental and even foundational research agency, but in truth, we've pioneered SBIR, and in the last decade, we've pioneered a program called I-Core, the NSF Innovation Core program, which precedes SBIR, where the focus is really on providing entrepreneurial education to budding entrepreneurs and students and talent, and providing them with opportunities to see what is the market potential for the concept coming out of the lab, the research environment. Who's the customer? Can we do customer discovery? And can we identify the lineage or the directionality that we want to take with our concept? And so I think we're really excited about having programs like the Convergence Accelerator and SBIR and I-Core and others like them that are a part of this lab to market platform all together under one home in the TIP Directorate. And then, of course, there are new programs, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. So with the Convergence Accelerator in particular, that's an effort that NSF stood up back in 2019, thereabouts, where the objective was to be able to say, okay, can we think about ways in which we can accelerate progress in research to impact by doing sort of a microcosm of what I just described for TIP as a whole? Can we bring the users to the table? Can we identify this societal and economic challenges, and what are some of the technology drivers that can address those societal and economic challenges? Can we create teams that have this sort of convergent flavor to them, as we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, that bring together multiple disciplinary perspectives, potentially bring together multiple sectors, companies, nonprofits, and so forth, to be able to carry out the work? And in many ways, by having that confluence of individuals coming together and perspectives coming together, can we pilot and prototype? So can we sort of move the research along that path from research to impact as expeditiously as we possibly can? And so as part of this design of a Convergence Accelerator, it's not every day, right, that academic researchers focus in on the translational aspects of their work. We train academic researchers and students around what's some of the fundamental research that they should be carrying out and conducting. And so in many ways, the Convergence Accelerator also, and many of our programs, acknowledges that we need to provide some sort of training or mentoring to be able to help folks understand and think about and progress from that fundamental research into some of the more translational spaces. And that includes, I think, use-inspired as well as translational research. And so the Convergence Accelerator additionally offers the teams whom we fund this curriculum, this experience where they go through a curriculum that's provided to them as a cohort. And so there's a little bit of what I would call co-opetition. They're learning from one another. They're cooperating with one another. At the same time, there's going to be a little bit of a down select that happens between the first phase of funding for a Convergence Accelerator track and the second phase of funding for a Convergence Accelerator track. And so essentially, to sort of summarize, over the course of the last almost 4 years now, we have run nearly a dozen tracks, each one focusing in on a specific technology plus society or economy use case, really trying to motivate use-inspired research. Everything from designing an open knowledge network that can help to drive future AI systems by integrating data and knowledge together that is foundational to AI technology, to new quantum technologies and systems, to thinking about ways in which technology can be brought to bear so that individuals with disabilities, persons with disabilities, can be and can feel as though they're an equal part of society. They can overcome those disabilities through technological innovations that can augment their experiences on a day-to-day basis. So these are very diverse tracks and topics that are often inspired by the community whom we serve as NSF, but they in many ways really try to bring together those convergent perspectives. They try to focus on the use cases and the prototyping that moves the research along and forward as expeditiously as possible. And along the way, they receive some training on the best ways and the best ways to partner, the best ways to identify the problem and approach the problem, and so forth.
Awesome. And as you were mentioning before, when in addition to creating these new fields and advancing them and advancing our country's excellence, we also need the excellent workforce there. And you have this other really great program called Experiential Learning for Emerging and Novel Technologies, or Excellent. And the interesting thing here, because you talk a little bit about a learning by doing experience, and you highlight, look, we can make a quantum physicist out of a physicist, but we could also take non-traditional education paths and also expedite through there. And it got me thinking, I did this episode with Charlie Tahan at the White House OSTP, running quantum information strategy over there. He started off at air conditioning installing, got to physics, now quantum. It's possible. And I really enjoyed that component of laying that out, that we're going to employ all strategies to really not just excite people, but move them quickly, expeditiously through these advanced emerging fields. Talk a little bit about Excellent, if you would.
Yeah, so I have to say, I love all my programs, right? I don't want any of my program directors to feel like I love one more than the other. I love all the programs that are in the TIP Directorate, but I think Excellent in particular is one that has struck a lot of accord with the broader community that TIP is trying to support and that NSF is trying to serve at the end of the day. And I think part of the reason for that is what you just said, Ira, that you don't necessarily have to have a STEM background to be able to become inspired by STEM, to be able to become a part of the STEM-driven workforce of the next decade, of the next decade after that, and so on. And so I think that what we need to do a better job of as leaders, as funders, as policymakers, is to be able to offer opportunities for talent anywhere and everywhere in this country. And there goes again, something that the director has said, creating opportunities for everyone and creating opportunities everywhere. It's incumbent upon us to be able to do that so that we can motivate, we can inspire folks to think about STEM and pursue that STEM trajectory. And maybe they get so inspired that they stick with it, just like Charlie did. It sounds like from his early days in air conditioning to now where he is today, leading the federal government strategy with respect to quantum information science for the next several years. And so the Excellent program in particular, our motivation with that program is what we just talked about. And our first competition this year around it is to specifically spotlight folks who are already in the workforce today. You know, we often talk about, let's think about students at the K through 12 level, or let's think about students at the undergraduate level or community college and so forth. But NSF provides STEM experiences and opportunities for talent from K all the way to being in the active workforce today. So folks who are adults making a living, but they want an even better paying job. They want an even better quality job than what they have today. Well, what we're trying to do with Excellent is to say, maybe there are organizations out there, maybe there are colleges and universities, maybe there are nonprofits, and so forth. Maybe they have an ecosystem within their region that surrounds them that they are trying to build up, where that ecosystem would afford connections between individuals like you and me and companies and governments and philanthropies and so forth that could serve as homes for folks like you and me to be able to have exposure to what it's like to work in AI, what it's like to work in data science, what it's like to work in cybersecurity, and so forth across the full range of technology areas. So I may be in the workforce today. I'm looking to do a pivot, as we talk about it, to do a pivot into a technology space. I've been watching the news. There's a lot of coverage about AI. I want to learn a little bit about AI. I want to pivot into that. Mm-hmm. Well, here's an opportunity for us to be able to fund cohorts of talent all around the country, regionally distributed, to do just that. Mm-hmm. And so Excellent is specifically to support those internships, those apprenticeships, those experiential opportunities that could serve as the spark for someone to say, yeah, I heard about it on the news. I'm interested in it. I want to know what it's about. Well, now I've had this experience for 6 months working at this company or this local government, and I now know what it's about, and I'm even more excited. So now I want to go off and get a certificate, or I want to go off into a degree program so that I can hone my skill set. And maybe because of that experience that I had at this company or this government agency, maybe now that's going to be a springboard for me a year from now to get a job at that company or at that government agency as well. And so what we're really trying to do with Excellent is to create these opportunities for folks to do these pivots potentially, and to learn hopefully a lot from these practical experiences about why they might want to do that pivot, how they could do that pivot, and not only create the spark, but show to them that it's possible for them to be able to do this at the end of the day too. So it's a program that we're really excited about. We are looking to invest on the order of about $30 million out of this fiscal year's budget to help support this effort. It's just sort of a seedling, a pilot effort this year. We've gotten tremendous interest from the community. We had over 1,200 people in the initial webinar for this program where we first rolled it out and announced it. You know, you get 400 people to a webinar and we're super excited. We got 1,200 people to a webinar, so we were overjoyed. And we've gotten, I think, a lot of really good quality proposals as well that we're looking forward to completing the review process on and funding here in the not too distant future.
One other one, and I have to, and obviously if I was in your position, and I would have picked my favorite child, but this one is pretty cool as well. Housed within your directorate is America's Seed Fund. And, you know, being from a biomedical like you background, you know, we always have to deal with the valley of death. And it seems like you're putting a little, you know, some potential in there for, you know, what happens after the initial funding, and if there's potential to sort of get into that next round of translational funding without handing over equity. That's a pretty exciting thing. Say a few words about the Seed Fund, if you would.
Yeah, so America's Seed Fund, also known as the SBIR, STTR, Small Business Innovation Research, Small Business Technology Transfer Programs. As I mentioned earlier, the SBIR program, we were proud to initiate it back in the 1970s and 1980s. Right. You know, we invest in any given year on the order of about 400 new startups and small businesses in a wide range of topic areas. Two things that I'll highlight, Ira, about this program. Number one, the fact that at NSF, given our mission space of supporting all the frontiers of science and engineering, in some sense, we are technology agnostic when it comes to the SBIR STTR program, or at least traditionally we have been. Now with the CHIPS and Science Act legislation, I expect we will continue to be, though we might emphasize an area or two every now and then. But we've really tried to say to the community, bring us your best ideas. You're just embarking on a new startup or small business, whether it be in clean energy or it's in chemical synthesis or it's in AI or it's in next generation microelectronics, regardless of the topic space, bring us your ideas. Thinking about food engineering, for instance, and food safety and security across the gamut, bring us your best ideas, and we'll be excited to take a look at them and see what we can do. So that's number one. I think we really take great pride in being sort of that technology agnostic agency for the SBIR STTR program. The other, which is sort of hand in glove with what I just described, is the fact that as an agency, with our SBIR program, and this is somewhat unique. I don't want to suggest that every other agency is not like this. There are examples that are, but one of the things that we strive for is we want to fund those earliest seedlings of startups and small businesses. So we often will fund projects or startups and small businesses once. Primarily, we fund them once. We hope that we can sort of catalyze them down a path, and then that will result in follow-on funding, that will result in them growing into huge successes. And so in many ways, we sort of think about it as we want to touch those companies when they're just starting out. Maybe they have 2, 3, 4, 5 employees, and we want to see them grow into huge successes for the country in the longer term. And we've seen some of those successes as well. Qualcomm, for example, is a great case study. That was a project that we funded back in the 1980s. It was a startup. It was a small business, right? And look at where Qualcomm today is in terms of how much it's touching the fabric of our connectivity and the fabric of our communication system on a day-to-day basis. So this is an effort that I think we're really excited about, and you'll see that with the CHIPS and Science Act legislation, if appropriation follows authorization, that's an important point. The CHIPS and Science legislation was an authorizing legislation. It said you can go forward and establish the TIP Directorate, and NSF can do all these other wonderful things. And we think that NSF should be funded at the level of $11.9 billion, for example, in this current fiscal year of 2023. But the actual dollars, the actual money, the actual appropriations flows later through appropriations bills. And so, as we watch to see appropriations, we hope keep pace with the authorizing levels. That gives us then the ability to be able to do many of the things that are called for in that legislation, including being creative, making it easier for companies to come into the SBIR program and flow through the SBIR program between phase 1 and phase 2, so that they can focus more on the work that needs to be done and maybe less on having to write lots and lots of proposals along the way. So we have some ideas along those dimensions, and we will see how things progress into the future.
Outstanding. All right, I know we're coming up at the top of the hour here, but while we have you, just I have a couple kids in the house here that are big fans of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Can you say a couple words about what the golden ticket strategy potentially is all about? Because I read about it a couple weeks ago. You were in the news talking about this one, kind of unique. Yeah. Just if you a couple minutes on that one, if you would.
Yeah, sure. We've talked about it a little bit, and I think one of the things that I want to stress is the CHIPS and Science Act legislation specifically calls on the TIP Directorate here at NSF to think a little bit outside the box when it comes to how we're conducting the scientific research and activities that we want to support out of the TIP Directorate. How do we do that, right? How do we identify the best ideas? How do we fund the best ideas, and so forth? And so, the way we like to think about it is if we're running a new program, we should understand what's the hypothesis of that program. What is it that we're trying to change or do or have impact on as a result of that program or that investment? And so in that spirit, we should also be thinking about the processes that we use. How do we do merit review, for example? How do we make decisions on the proposals that we ultimately choose to fund? How do we ensure that we're funding projects that are high risk and potentially high reward as well in the long term too? So that golden ticket news, I think it got a lot of news, but I think one thing I'll stress to you, Ira, is I think it's important to note we use the golden ticket methodology to some extent every day here at the National Science Foundation. Proposals come in, they're reviewed by external peer reviewers. Our program officers take those peer review inputs as input, and then they make decisions and they try to create well-balanced portfolios. And sometimes their decision might not mirror exactly what the review panel is saying for good reason, whether it be portfolio balance, whether it be they too have subject matter expertise that they're bringing to the table and so forth. So our program officers are empowered in that way on a day-to-day basis. And so I think we're just trying to think about what are ways in which we can explore how our reviewers engage with the proposals and how they give us those inputs. We're also trying to explore ways in which we can measure some of the decisions that are made or not made, and how we can get better about that piece of it too. So that's where I think the science of science, or sort of experimentation, but experimentation where you also do some sort of rigorous evaluation and assessment as well, looking at the data and looking at the results. Those are all aspects of there's the line golden tickets, but I think that those are all of the aspects that come together as part of that serve to help us understand what is the change that we want to introduce on a pilot basis, how are we going to measure its effectiveness, and how are we, based off of that measurement, going to get to some conclusion about whether it was impactful or not. And so those are all things that we're trying to think about in TIP, but also in collaboration. I want to stress that something like that has to be in collaboration with our colleagues in the social sciences, for example, where there's a science of science investment that's made on a day-to-day basis by our colleagues to conduct research in that space beyond NSF. So let's learn from some of that research too.
Erwin, while we have you, anything else hot for 2023 in the coming months that we should know about in terms of talks you're going to be giving, conferences you may be presenting at per the TIP Directorate? Anything else that I missed that's on the calendar that you want to mention? Please take the floor.
So just two things I'll mention, Ira. So first of all, let me again say thank you for having me. Really great to be a part of this conversation. I hope it's helpful to you and to our audience as well. Second thing I would say is, so maybe I lied, three things. The second thing I would say is, for us to realize the vision of CHIPS in Science, for us to realize the vision of the TIP Directorate that I described, it's going to take all of us working together. So I would strongly encourage everyone who's out there listening to this podcast to please engage with us. Go to our website, reach out, look at some of our programs. This is about going beyond simply a focus on academia. We certainly want academia at the table, but thinking about all those other different perspectives that we need to have, including your perspective. And so I'd encourage anyone who's watching to find ways to engage, because that's how we're going to be able to accomplish the vision that I think Congress, the administration, our director, everyone has set out for the TIP Directorate. So that's number one, or number two, I guess. And then the final thing I would say, direct answer to your question, is we have a number of award announcements that we're looking forward to being able to make over the course of the coming weeks and months into the rest of this fiscal year and into the rest of this calendar year. Everything from excellent that we talked about to new SBIRs that we're funding. We didn't talk about the Regional Innovation Engines program, trying to grow innovation capacity in regions of the country, particularly ones where we've underinvested over the course of the last several decades. So I think there's a lot of excitement that's building in terms of announcements of awards that our team has been working toward and that the community has been working toward over the course of our first year of existence. And so I would just encourage folks to stay tuned for that as we move forward.
And we will put all the links in the bio of the show, but it's really wishing you the best with all this, Erwin. Amazing portfolio and team you put together there. For everybody that's going to be listening to this episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Dr. Erwin Gianchandani, United States National Science Foundation Assistant Director, Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. Erwin, again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk and educate us for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing at NSF. And as we like to say here on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us via what you're doing. Really great story.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much, everyone.
Great having you.